We were high up in the mountains, far from town, far from anyone. The air was thin and cold. My mother-in-law, Susan, turned to me with a glare that made my stomach twist. "Take care now," she said in a cold, flat voice. Then, without another word, she slammed the door of her expensive SUV. The sharp sound echoed through the still night air. Gravel crunched under the tires as she sped off, disappearing into the darkness. Moonlight lit up the path just enough for me to see her face one last time. There was a cruel smile on her lips and something dangerous in her eyes, something sharp and wild, like a predator that had just caught its prey. "Mom, why?" I whispered, my voice shaking. But she only leaned out the window, laughing. It was a cold, chilling laugh that made my skin crawl. "Goodbye, Emily," she sneered. "No one's coming to help you. By tomorrow, you'll just be food for the wolves." Her words cut into me like ice. I stood there, frozen. The roar of her SUV faded into the night, and soon the red tail lights vanished. I was alone. Panicked, I pulled out my phone to call for help, but it wouldn't turn on. That's when I remembered. Susan had borrowed my charger earlier in the day. Now it made sense. She had planned all of this. She'd brought me out here on purpose, knowing my phone would die. She had lied, telling me she wanted to show me a beautiful spot for stargazing because she knew I loved taking pictures of the night sky. I had believed her. I felt so stupid. Maybe if I had tried harder to get along with her, maybe if I had done more to fix things between her and John, none of this would have happened. But now, none of that mattered. I was standing in the middle of nowhere, shivering under the stars, with no one around for miles. The wind howled through the trees. I heard distant cries, wolves, or maybe other animals, and I felt fear crawl over my skin like frost. I took a step back, then I heard it, crunch, the sound of footsteps behind me, heavy, getting closer. My heart pounded. Let me explain who I am. My name is Emily Matthews. I'm 26 years old, and I've been married to John for 2 years. When we first met, he was sweet, patient, and thoughtful. He helped me when I was sick. He cooked dinner after I came home late from work. I truly believed marrying him was the best decision I had ever made. I grew up in a wealthy family, but I didn't want to rely on my parents' money. I worked hard to build a career of my own. That's why I never told John about my family's wealth. I wanted our life together to be built on effort, not money. John and I both worked in the bridal industry. I loved my job. I was happy, but then things started to change. John quit his job suddenly, saying he wanted to start his own business. I was nervous about it, but I supported him. I believed in him. That's when the truth came out. I found out he had been seeing another woman, someone from his college days. He had taken her on expensive trips, racking up over $50,000 in debt. I had no idea. I was heartbroken, but what shocked me even more was that he started his business with her as his partner. He said his family was helping him financially, and they were, especially his mother, Susan. She worshipped him. She thought he could do no wrong. She treated me like I was an outsider, like I was trying to steal her precious son away. And then there was Megan, John's sister. She didn't work. She said she didn't want to deal with formalities like having a boss. She lived off John completely. She was demanding, lazy, and rude. For a while, I tried to ignore it. I loved John. I thought things would get better, but Susan and Megan started showing up at our home without warning. They dug through my things, used my personal belongings for their social media posts, and acted like everything I owned belonged to them. One day, Susan took my favorite brown purse, one I had bought with my own money before I even met John. She broke it. I hoped she would apologize, but she didn't. She just smiled and said, "That was bought with John's money. I don't owe you anything." I reminded her gently that it was mine, that I had worked hard for it, but she laughed in my face. "Girls like you don't have money for bags like that," she said. "Don't try to fool me." That's when I realized, she had already made up her mind about me. In her eyes, I was a gold digger, nothing more. I went to John for support, but he brushed me off. "Just be patient," he said. "Mom's going through a lot." I felt so alone. I had always seen myself as strong and independent, but their constant cruelty made me feel powerless. Then John's business started to fail. He couldn't support Susan and Megan's lifestyle anymore. When he finally told them no, they were furious, but instead of finding jobs, they came up with a new plan. "Take some of Emily's money," Susan said. "Give it to us. Family comes first." I tried to explain, again, that I paid my own way and split expenses with John, but they didn't care. They started visiting less, and I hoped maybe, finally, they were done. I was wrong. When Susan discovered my family was wealthy, something in her changed. She became obsessed. She believed that if I were out of the picture, she and Megan could control John's money, and maybe even inherit money from me. It didn't matter that I hadn't written a will. It didn't matter that my parents, not John's family, would inherit anything I left behind. Susan had convinced herself that getting rid of me was the answer to all her problems. She started researching remote places. She found this mountain spot, far away from civilization. She knew I loved the stars. She knew I wouldn't suspect a thing. Out here, no one will ever find you. It's bear season. This will look like an accident, she told Megan. Megan agreed. I'll drive you, Mom. We're doing this for John, she said, but they weren't doing it for John. They were doing it for themselves. The day they planned it, Susan called me and acted like a different person. Sweet, warm. Emily, I know how much you love stargazing. I found this spot, just for you. Come with us. I felt uneasy, but part of me wanted to believe she was finally accepting me, that maybe, somehow, things were turning around. They complimented my clothes, my hair. Susan even said, I've always wanted a daughter like you. When we arrived at the spot, they smiled and said, go ahead, take some pictures. We'll grab some things from the car. I stepped out and lifted my camera to the stars. They were beautiful, so quiet, so bright. Then, I heard the slam of a door. I turned, the engine started, the doors were locked. Susan stuck her head out the window and shouted, we'll be taking the house and the car. Watch out for bears, honey. And then they were gone. Just like that, they left me alone in the mountains. Celebrating, it's all taken care of, Susan said with a big smile, thinking everything had gone according to her plan. She and Megan went out that evening for a fancy dinner, laughing and enjoying themselves like they had nothing to worry about. They truly believed that their problems were over, and they could finally relax. But their joy didn't last long. When they returned home later that night, they were met with a shocking sight. Police cars were parked right in their driveway, lights flashing in the dark. Standing beside the officers was me, calm, safe, and very much alive. My father stood by my side, along with several uniformed police officers. Susan froze. Her eyes went wide with shock. What? How are you here? She stammered, her voice trembling. Megan, clearly panicking, tried to slip away quietly, but a police officer stopped her before she could move further. What Susan and Megan didn't know was that I had been saved because of the safety rules my father had always made me follow. Since I was a teenager, he had insisted that I keep a GPS tracking device on me at all times. He even made sure I had an emergency alert button, just in case. That night, when I realized something was wrong, I pressed the button. My father, who had access to a private jet due to his business connections, flew out immediately with a rescue team. We were in a remote mountain area, but the clear skies made it easier for the rescue plane to land. Within hours, I was rescued, cold and scared, but safe. Even better, I had recorded everything that happened in the car that day. My father had once told me, always record anything that feels wrong. You never know when you'll need proof. And he was right. On the recording, Susan's voice came through loud and clear. We'll be taking the house and the car. Watch out for bears. That recording, along with the GPS data and my rescue, became solid evidence. The police arrested Susan and Megan on the spot for attempted murder and fraud. Susan fainted from the shock, and Megan started crying and yelling, blaming her mother for everything. Meanwhile, my husband John, who had gone missing during all this, was found with his mistress. He ended up testifying against Susan and Megan in court, hoping to save himself, but it was just one more betrayal from someone who had already broken my heart. Soon, the whole situation made national news. Newspapers and websites called Susan the mother-in-law who wanted millions. People were furious when they learned how Susan and Megan used my clothes and personal items to show off on social media, pretending to live a luxurious life. John, who used to be proud of his image and reputation, now couldn't even walk outside without being recognized and shamed. The next day, all of Susan and Megan's bank accounts were frozen. Their expensive lifestyle came crashing down. Without John's financial support, they couldn't even afford groceries. To make things worse for John, the truth about his affair came out online. People shared screenshots, messages, and pictures of him with his mistress, ruining his public image forever. He lost his job, his friends, and most of his dignity. That's when I learned something even more painful. John had been cheating on me since the very beginning of our marriage. All those kind gestures he had shown me early on now felt fake, like a performance. I kept asking myself, why did he marry me if he never loved me? Even though my heart was broken, I knew I had to move forward with my life. Susan and Megan were kicked out of their fancy apartment and forced to move into government housing. It wasn't long before someone leaked their new address online. People showed up outside, shouting at them and taking photos. Susan couldn't handle the pressure. She became emotionally unstable, often seen muttering to herself and complaining that her life was ruined. Megan, without money or support, tried to find part-time work, but she wasn't skilled or willing to work hard. One day, Megan even messaged me. "Working at weddings and wearing pretty clothes sounds fun. Can you help me get a job like yours?" she wrote. I didn't reply. She had mocked my job before. Now that she had nothing, she thought it was something easy and glamorous, but she didn't understand the hard work behind it, and I didn't owe her anything. Susan ended up living in a small, dirty apartment covered in graffiti. Her pride was gone. As for me, I left the house I had once shared with John and moved back in with my parents. It wasn't easy. I still had emotional wounds, but I felt safer with them. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was John. Just seeing his name made me feel sick. "Emily," he said, "I'm so sorry. I've cut ties with my mom. Please, let's try again. I've changed." But I didn't believe him. After everything he had done, his words meant nothing. "Maybe your mistress needs your protection more than I do," I said coldly, and then I hung up. But Susan wasn't finished yet. Desperate and bitter, she hired a private investigator to dig into my life, hoping to find something she could use against me. All they found was one thing: I had PTSD from everything I had been through. Somehow, Susan thought she could use that to ruin me. One evening, while I was walking home alone, she appeared on the sidewalk. Her clothes were torn and old, but her eyes were wild. "Guess the bears didn't get you," she hissed, grinning in a creepy way. I froze. My hands started shaking as painful memories came rushing back. Then she said something even more shocking. She had a video of me and threatened to post it unless I paid her money. I knew the threat was empty, but the fear she brought back was real. She got into a car and drove off, leaving me shaken. I called my father, and he was furious. Using his resources, he looked into John's company and discovered financial crimes, fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. Once exposed, John was forced to confess. Even his mistress, Lena, had no idea about the criminal side of his business. When she found out, she left him in shock and disgust. John's accounts were frozen. He lost everything: his home, his job, even his mother's support. Yes, even Susan, who once backed him in everything, turned her back on him and said, "You're no son of mine." In the end, they all had nothing. Their selfishness had finally caught up to them. As for me, I focused on healing. I found new meaning in helping others who had experienced toxic families and betrayal like I had. With my parents' help, I turned the peaceful retreat house where I had once been rescued into a shelter for people starting over. I studied counseling and earned my qualification, so I could offer real support to those in pain. Little by little, the center grew. People came there seeking peace, healing, and safety. One day, a woman arrived at the refuge after escaping her abusive home. She was scared and unsure, but I looked at her kindly and said, "You've done something brave. I'm proud of you for leaving." I left, too. Her eyes welled up with tears, and I gently reminded her, "It's okay to feel pain, and it's okay to protect your peace." And that's how I found purpose again. By helping others rebuild their lives, I began to heal, too. Susan, Megan, and John were still struggling, but I didn't feel sorry for them. They were just facing the consequences of their actions. And as for me, I finally felt free. The refuge became a place filled with light and second chances, a place where no one else would have to go through what I did, not alone.